Hi, I'm Jamie Poisson. It has been an eventful few weeks in Canadian politics. We had a non-confidence vote geared at toppling the government last Wednesday. It failed, but the Conservatives are back with another one now. What do the Liberals need to do to keep their government afloat? Where does this leave opposition parties like the Bloc Québécois? The tone and tenor in the House has gotten really hot. I mean really hot, incredibly fractious. And Pierre Poilievre has taken on Bell Canada and its news arm, CTV. So we're going to parse through all of this today with my colleague, JP Tasker. JP, hello.
Hey, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. All right. So let's start with the non-confidence votes. As I mentioned, the one the Conservatives put forward last Wednesday failed, as was expected. The Bloc and the NDP and the Greens voted against it. And we expected that. They said that they would do that. But the Conservatives introduced another one less than 24 hours later. And JP, just before we get into what the Liberals may have to do to keep the other opposition parties on side, on a logistical note, can the Conservatives just keep introducing these motions to trigger an election? Is this just how this is going to be until an election now?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, the Conservatives are very, very eager to go to an election as soon as possible. They're just itching for an election right now, and it's not hard to understand why. I mean, they have a huge lead in the polls. The CBC poll tracker suggests they're up about 20 points nationwide. So they're on track for a massive supermajority government, winning virtually every part of the country. So they're like, let's get to an election. We want to do this now. So they're going to introduce non-confidence motions regularly in the House. You mentioned one failed last week. They introduced another one. That's going to go to a vote this week.
Mr. Speaker, who could be against the following motion? That, given that, after 9 years, the government has doubled housing costs, taxed food, punished work, unleashed crime, and is the most centralizing government in Canadian history, the House has lost confidence in the government and offers Canadians the option to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
They have 3 more opportunities between now and Christmas to introduce non-confidence motions, but they could try and bring them down on other things too, like when there's financial matters to discuss, a budget vote. There are other opportunities for them to try and trigger an election, and you bet they're going to try and do it.
So what do the Liberals have to do here to keep their government afloat?
They essentially have to cajole some of the other opposition parties to stand with them on the next non-confidence motion votes over the next several months. They have to essentially ask the NDP and the Bloc Québécois to go with them, to go along with them, to try and push off the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, who are eager to bring them down. And the reason why they have to have at least one of the other opposition parties stand with them is because we're in a minority parliament. The Liberals only have 153 of the 338 seats in Parliament right now. So they can't win one of these votes on Liberal support alone. They need someone else to come along with them, and either the Bloc or the NDP would do it. That would give them the majority they need to maintain the confidence of the House and to continue governing. So that's what this is all about. How can we get the Bloc or the NDP on side, or maybe a bonus, get them both?
So let's do the Bloc first. The Bloc has said that they would support the Liberals, but, they want some stuff in return, right? And the leader, Yves-François Blanchet, has issued a bit of an ultimatum here.
Our job is to serve Quebecers. Triggering an election or stopping an election is not our motivation.
And just tell me a bit about what he says he wants in exchange for supporting the Liberals, at the moment.
Yeah, the Bloc is saying, okay, if you want our support, Liberal government, it's going to cost you. And they have issued a number of ultimatums. Essentially, the big ask is they want the government to hike old age security, so pensions for the elderly, by 10%.
What we are proposing is good for retired persons in Quebec, but also in Canada.
The problem is for the government that comes with a huge price tag. It's about $16 billion over the next 5 years. That would really blow a hole in their budget. They're trying to rein things in. They're trying to reduce spending to maintain their top credit rating. So a huge cost like this would not be a welcome development. And there's also questions about generational fairness, of course, as well, something the government has said they care about. We already spend about $80 billion a year on elderly benefits like old age security and the guaranteed income supplement for low-income seniors. So for the Bloc to ask for something like this, it's a big demand, and they want it quickly. They want it by the end of October. They're also asking the government to come along with a private member's bill that's before Parliament right now that would protect supply-managed farm sectors like dairy, eggs, and poultry. Always a controversial issue. Essentially, they want them to exempt these farm sectors from any future trade deals. So that would also be kind of problematic for the government because they have to renegotiate the new NAFTA sometime soon, and there may be some bargaining going on there that would involve the farm sectors like it did last time. So some big asks from the Bloc Québécois in exchange for supporting the government.
The Bloc will negotiate based on the fact that the government would have refused to have been useful to Quebecers on fundamental issues, and will start discussions with other oppositions to reverse the government. Of course,
They say, though, if they do go along with these two programs, if they do increase OAS and do protect the agricultural sectors, they'll support them beyond Christmas. So that would really guarantee the government's survival until the new year. It just might cost them.
What do you think the odds are that the Liberals will do that, will go along with the Bloc?
It's possible. It's possible because I think the Liberal Party is very eager to hold on right now. They know that they are doing so poorly in the polls. They know they're down 18, 19, 20 points. They know it would be a bloodbath if there were an election held anytime soon. And the Liberal strategy is to kind of hold on and hope that people get tired of Pierre Poilievre. They hope that they can kind of bloody him up a bit, that they can make people be scared of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. And they feel like they need more time to do that. They don't think that that would be a successful endeavor just yet. You know, they need to have a few months of ad campaigns, of more pointed attacks in the House. They really want to make Canadians second guess whether they want to support Pierre Poilievre. So I think that it's possible, frankly, that the Liberals do go along with some of the opposition demands. I don't know if they'll do exactly what the Bloc Québécois want, but they may be able to turn to the NDP as well and ask them to kind of back them up at least for a few more months. It's just whether the opposition parties really want to do that. Because as it stands now, they would really benefit in an election if it were held right now. Even the NDP, some polls suggest that the NDP has actually surpassed the Liberals in English Canada as the second most popular party after the Conservatives. So would there be any benefit for them to hang on longer? It's, to be determined.
I just want to be clear about one thing. The Liberals could lose the Bloc, right? And still keep power if they had the NDP on side.
That's right. They absolutely can. They have enough votes if they just cobble together the NDP and the Liberal MPs in the House of Commons. If those two parties stand together against a non-confidence motion, they would survive. The government would survive. They don't need the Bloc Québécois. It's just a question of whether the NDP is willing to stand with them again and again and again. After Jagmeet Singh, the party's leader, kind of dramatically tore up that supply and confidence agreement earlier this month. Like, does the NDP have the appetite to continue supporting the Liberals for the next 3, 6, 12 months?
You mentioned that the NDP has gotten a bit of a boost in the polls, which, might make an election a little bit more
likely,
palatable for them right now. Yeah, although, they still don't have a lot of money, right? That's important too, right? To run a campaign.
Yes. The problem is they have so little cash on hand, and they are bringing in so much less money than the other major parties.
But what about the Bloc? Why might the Bloc like an election right now? I know they just won that longtime Liberal seat in Montreal, which was yet another huge upset for the Liberals.
Yeah, I mean, the Bloc Québécois winning a seat on the island of Montreal in a riding that has, I think it's like nearly 40% English-speaking people in that riding. So that's a huge upset for the Bloc Québécois to win a seat like that.
Sauvé took home 28% of ballots compared to 27.2% for Liberal candidate Laura Palestini and 26.1% for the NDP's Craig Sauvé. 248 votes are what separated the Bloc from the Liberals.
I mean, the Bloc Québécois are indifferent. I think they are happy to go to an election whenever one comes up. They're not particularly concerned about the timing. I think that they know that they are essentially a protest vote. A lot of French-speaking Quebecers just park their vote with the Bloc Québécois when they're unsure of what they should do. When they're not sure about the Liberals, they're a little worried about the Conservatives, they just go with the Bloc Québécois because they know that that's essentially a vote for Quebec, in Quebec's interests. It's not going to prompt a referendum on independence if they vote for this party that is only represented at Parliament Hill and in the federal scene. So they know that it's not a huge risk to go with the Bloc Québécois. And also the separatist movement in Quebec is kind of enjoying a bit of a renaissance right now. I mean, support for independence itself hasn't ticked up all that much, but a lot of people are frustrated with the premier in that province, François Legault, and the Coalition Avenir Québec, the governing party. A lot of people turning to the Parti Québécois, which is, the provincial party that first launched the modern Quebec independence movement. So they have a popular, charismatic leader. Some of that good fortune for the Parti Québécois could rub off on the Bloc Québécois, which runs candidates federally. So the Bloc is like, yeah, we'll go to an election. If you don't meet our demands by October, we're going to start to work with some of the opposition parties to try and bring down Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government. They're okay with that scenario.
Let's move on to the tone and tenor in the House of late. It is generating a lot of thoughts. It's been very fractious in there. How would you describe the vibe and the tone right now?
Yeah, it's pretty nasty. People are grumpy and they're riled up. They're ready to take it out on one another. They're like, okay, let's go to blows. And it really has been quite nasty. I mean, frankly, I've been watching Question Period virtually every session of it since 2014. I've been watching this for a long time, and I think that it's probably among the nastiest I've ever seen it. I mean, I don't want to say it is the nastiest ever because it's hard to gauge, and I feel like we always say that every time there's some development, but yeah, it's
unprecedented nastiness.
Yes, right. Yeah. And it's like, you know what, I'm not sure about that. I'm sure it might have been a little worse during some of the heated debates over conscription, say in the 20th century, but it's not great. And I think a lot of people are kind of itching to get to an election on the Conservative benches, and they're kind of taking it out on their Liberal colleagues, trying to bully them, bullying the NDP potentially, and as well into going to an election because they think that this government is incompetent and they want to end it and they want to go to an election, and they're trading barbs. Absolutely. And the Liberals are giving it back. The NDP is very hard on the Conservatives as well. It's not just one side that's behind all of this. There's just a lot of heated rhetoric right now.
Well, take me through just a couple of examples, just so that we can give people a sense of what it's been like. I mean, you mentioned the NDP. There was that moment where Jagmeet Singh, basically ended up in the middle of the chamber, right? Like, kind of yelling at Pierre Poilievre. Just tell me what happened there.
Yeah, so essentially the Conservatives are very frustrated that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP ripped up that supply and confidence agreement that propped up the government and then immediately said only, days later that they would support the government on these non-confidence motions going forward. So Pierre Poilievre called Jagmeet Singh
a fake, a phony, and a fraud. How can anyone ever believe what this sellout NDP leader says in the future?
A liar, which we don't usually hear a lot of. Pierre Poilievre said that Jagmeet Singh ripped up the deal before by-elections just to give voters a sense that he was not standing with the Liberals. Then as soon as those by-elections were over, he's back with the Liberals, and that's why he's a phony and he can't be trusted. He's a sellout. Not great, right? And so Jagmeet Singh, obviously, it got to him at this point, and he stepped onto the floor of the House of Commons and looked right at Pierre Poilievre and said, "I'm right here, bro." Simply suggesting that if you want to go toe-to-toe, I'm willing to do it.
Poilievre appeared to point in Singh's direction and repeatedly say, "Do it."
He obviously didn't touch him. There was no physical exchange, but just like the body language suggesting that Jagmeet Singh was not willing to take it anymore.
There was another one I want to talk to you about, and I think that this happened last week during Question Period. It was the bathtub one, right? And that is going to sound very weird very weird to people. So maybe you can explain what happened there. I think it will require a bit of a backstory.
Yeah, so essentially the government of Canada bought a new apartment in New York City for the Consul General, who is Tom Clark, a former journalist who was appointed to this ambassador role. And it was quite a pricey apartment that they bought, $9 million. And the Conservatives have been making hay out of that purchase for a long time, although the government says they're selling the old one for more than what they paid for this new one. So actually they're going to make money on this transaction. But the Conservatives have been very critical of buying this very luxurious apartment that has this great bathtub in it that's clad in some expensive stone of some sort,
I think it's copper.
Stunning powder room finished in jewel onyx, crystallo gold quartzite countertops, a handcrafted copper soaking tub, custom bronze bathroom fixtures, $5,000 coffee machine. Did the Prime Minister go and inspect this palace in the sky on his recent trip to New York?
And the Prime Minister was responding to that in question period saying we need a nice apartment. We need a place for, Tom Clark and other future consul generals to meet with world leaders.
Engaging with international leaders on fighting climate change, on solving global crises, on standing up unequivocally for Ukraine.
And then Garnet Genuis, the Conservative MP, chirped from the other side of the House, like, what are you doing, meetings in the bathtub with Tom? And the Prime Minister bristled at the suggestion that he was sharing a bathtub with the Consul General, with Tom Clark, and suggested that that was a homophobic remark.
Mr. Speaker, don't worry, on this side of the House, we're used to casual homophobic comments from the other side of the House. Mr. Speaker, what is it about...
two men sharing a bathtub. There are many tropes about Justin Trudeau, a lot of accusations over the years that are false, of course, but that's like kind of online rhetoric, kind of homophobic takes on Trudeau, and he called it out.
Standing up to bullies requires us to call them out on their crap sometimes, and that's what I will do.
And Garnet Genuis, he responded to those allegations, right? And he said that he wasn't making homophobic remarks.
Yeah, he stood up and rather flamboyantly said,
the Hansard notes, does he engage with them in the bathtub? The point of that comment is to illustrate that, of course, meetings don't take place in a bathtub. A luxurious bathtub has nothing to do with meetings. The Prime Minister's answer had nothing to do with the questions, but it had nothing to do with sex. I wasn't thinking about sex at all.
He was quite animated in trying to defend himself because he really did feel like his comments were misconstrued, that he wasn't referencing gay people or trying to call the Prime Minister gay or, to try and imply that he was having relations with Tom Clark. He was just trying to call out the government for this expensive bathtub and saying, okay, if you have this apartment for meetings, why do you need such a luxurious copper bathtub? Maybe not everyone was buying it necessarily because Garnet Genuis is known more as a social conservative and has made some comments about conversion therapy in the past, so people were a little skeptical of it. But he was quite adamant that he was really not trying to make a homophobic slur about the Prime Minister.
So I think a lot of people listening, and I say this with no political leanings, I think objectively probably just feel like this is at minimum very high school, sort of childish, all of this, right?
Yeah, I always think about the visitors that come to Parliament Hill and that are in the galleries watching Question Period. These are like regular people. School children.
Like students.
Yeah.
Students.
And like school children, like young people, like tweens, like 12, 13, 14. A lot of class trips filter through here all the time. And I'm always like, what are they thinking when they leave this place? It can't be a good impression of our democracy and how our institutions function. You got Pierre Poilievre calling Chrystia Freeland incompetent.
This incompetent finance minister would tell you that
Trudeau, he's a fake and a phony.
Prime Minister demonstrates once again he is a fake and he is a phony.
Karina Gould calling, Poilievre a fraudster.
So over the top, so irresponsible, so immature, and something that only a fraudster would do. When he's
Jagmeet Singh also, a biting assessment of the Liberals.
It became very clear to me that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals were far too weak to stop big corporations from ripping off people. And people deserve more.
Yeah, it's not great. It doesn't leave a great impression for people as they watch.
Ida, can you elaborate for me a little bit more on why people, maybe people even in Ottawa, think that things have gotten so hot and personal, like at the moment? Of course, the stakes are quite high. We could go to an election any minute, but why else?
I think both sides feel like, both the Conservatives and the Liberals feel like their opponent is a threat to the country. I feel like the Conservatives think the Liberals have done a very poor job while in government. The economy's not great. We've been through a kind of a tough time with these higher interest rates. The housing market, people are priced out. And so the Conservatives feel like the Liberals need to go. They have been bad for the country. They have allowed immigration to spiral out of control. There's a problem with international students and temporary foreign workers. And they just feel like the Liberals have not served the country well. Whereas the Liberals feel like, we cannot let the Conservatives win. These guys are not going to be good for our country. They do not represent Canadian values. They are too far right. They are too aligned with social conservative voices. So both sides feel like they really have a mission ahead of them to try and stop the other one from winning. There is just a lot of tension, and they feel like it's an existential fight. And when you're in that sort of mindset, this is the sort of stuff that happens, right? You start to lose sight of your opponent as a human being, and you're willing to just toss whatever you want over at the other side, and hopefully something sticks, no matter how nasty it is.
The last thing that I want to touch on with you before we go is a fight between Poilievre and Bell Media. And so let me try to explain a little bit about what happened here, because you were kind enough to take the bathtub. It's basically, it was a segment on CTV News, and it edited Poilievre's words in a way that would have left the impression that he wanted an election over the Liberals' dental care program. What he said, which is something that he has said many times, was that he wanted a carbon tax election. So tell me a bit about how Poilievre responded to what happened there.
So he was like genuinely aggrieved and felt that CTV did him wrong, that they edited this clip and allowed it to follow a piece of script that talked about the dental care program. And so he felt like CTV really did him wrong by trying to suggest in their item that he was going to bring down the government because of the dental care program. And really, as you said, is he really wants to. It was wrong. The CTV clip was edited. It was altered. It was not a fair reflection necessarily of where he stood on this non-confidence motion. He wasn't bringing it about because of dental care. He wants to have a carbon tax election, as you rightly summarized. He wants the next election to be about the Liberal government's climate plan that, levies taxes on fuels and then rebates the money in an attempt to bring down the country's greenhouse gas emissions. And he felt like that report from CTV was, in his words,
extremely dishonest and fraudulent report from Bell Media-controlled CTV, who's a company that is whose bonds have been downgraded to near junk status as its overpaid CEO empties the books to pay his wealthy friends an unacceptably and unrealistically high dividend.
He really took it out on the CEO, which is something you don't really see very often. You don't see a senior politician like Pierre Poilievre kind of lashing out at a publicly traded company like this, a company that's very important to the Canadian economy. A lot of people hold Bell stock, either as retail investors or in their pension plans. And he was going after Mirko Bibic, the CEO, saying without evidence that he put the reporters up to this, that the CEO was responsible for what he's calling a deceptive edit, that, they were essentially doing his bidding. Obviously, that's not what Bell says happened here. They maintain it was just a misunderstanding, but Poilievre very much going on the offensive and taking on a major publicly traded company for what their reporters did in their media division.
Right. And I just, I'm sorry if you mentioned this and I missed it, but CTV released a statement apologizing. And then, again, they released another statement and they said that 2 people in the news division are currently not working there anymore. Just JP, right before we leave here, things seem very tenuous right now, as we've discussed. And where do you think things go from here?
Well, you and I have talked in the past about the Prime Minister and his future, and that was kind of the open question for weeks, especially after that terrible by-election loss in Toronto for the Liberals. People were like, he can't go on like this. You can't lose a long-time Liberal safe seat like Toronto, St. Paul's, and carry on. And then he lost in Montreal just a few weeks
ago.
Yeah,
then they did it again.
Yeah, and they did it again.
Yeah.
But you know what? His position now is more secure than ever. In many ways, there is no movement afoot to oust the Prime Minister, to get rid of Justin Trudeau. There have been some people that have come forward to say, we got to get rid of this guy, but not many, right? He has his caucus and his cabinet lined up behind him. So they're going into this battle with Justin Trudeau at the helm, and that's what it's going to be. And so they just have to try and hold off these non-confidence votes in their eyes. They have to try and hold off these motions and try and regroup and take on Pierre Poilievre, bring him down a few notches, and then try and hold on and win at least a minority government in the next election. But that's a huge, tall order, and it's going to be up to the opposition parties to play ball, the Bloc Québécois and or the NDP to go along with the Liberals, and it's not a certain thing that they will.
All right. Well, JP, very exciting stuff. Thank you very much. As always, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
All right. That is all for today. I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.